Hi, how are you? How's your life? My name is Sierra, I go by Sweet Pea Cosplay, and today we are going to be breaking down my Rena Rouge bodysuit. I'm going to be going over all of the steps I went through to make this bodysuit completely from scratch. I've never made a bodysuit before, so this was a big learning experience. And truthfully, I would have just purchased the costume, but I could not find any place that had it the way that I wanted it to look and able to make it in my size. But that's the whole point of costuming. Sometimes you just have to figure stuff out as you go along. So the first thing that I did was I put on my shapewear because I am not going to be wearing a bodysuit without some kind of structure underneath it. Once I had my shapewear on, I took my measurements of my bust, waist, and hip. These measurements ended up being 49.5 for my bust, 45.5 for my waist, and 52.5 for my hips at their widest. For my vision of the Rena Rouge suit, I wanted it to be two pieces. First, we were going to have the underbody suit, and then the top half was going to be a separate piece because she has kind of that tailcoat happening. Starting with the underbody suit, I used McCall's M7269, and I cut out the pieces for everything but the sleeves, really. The piece numbers that I ended up using were 2 and 3. Now, this pattern wasn't made in my size, so once I traced out the patterns, I did have to add a couple of inches to the side so that it would fit my body type. Once I had all of the pieces cut out of the orange fabric, I just sewed it together like the instructions on the pattern said to. Once it was all sewed together, I essentially just tried it on and took away inches as I needed to, because I ended up making it too big for my body type. So pieces of Rena Rouge are white. To start on that, I took a piece of chalk, and while I was wearing the bodysuit, I traced out what I wanted the shape of the white parts to be. After I traced out the pattern that I wanted on the bodysuit, I cut it out and I transferred it over to some white fabric. I decided to double layer up on the white fabric as it was kind of sheer and I didn't want anybody to see through the bodysuit. And then I just cut out the pieces in white. Now, because the white pieces were a slippery material, I decided to go ahead and sew those together first, and then I very carefully attached them to the bodysuit in the same shape that I had cut out. Next, I did the same process, but on my legs this time to trace out where I wanted the boots to go. I'd never made boot covers before, so this was kind of a new process for me, and it's very likely that there are easier ways to do it than what I did, but I essentially put on the boot that I decided I was going to be wearing underneath the costume, and I laid down and traced out the shape of my leg in the black fabric that I was going to use for the boot. I pinned it all together, that way it wouldn't move, and then I cut out the shape and cut off the excess fabric. Then I sewed along the back of what would be my calf, and I tried it on multiple times so that I knew how to modify it. I did have to take it in a couple of times just so that I got the general shape that I wanted. It was very much a trial and error process. I did leave a hole for my heel to go through, and I finished that off with a seam, that way it wasn't going to rip open. Spoiler alert though, it totally ripped open. And just like I did with the white pieces, I just carefully pinned and sewed the boot covers onto the rest of the bodysuit. Now, because I knew that I was going to be walking on rougher terrain like concrete, I decided that I was going to put a sole on the bottom of the boot cover. So I took this sole that I had purchased from Amazon and I just cut it out in the general shape of what my boot was. I googled a fox print and I decided that I wanted to put it on the bottom of that sole because Rena has them and I thought it was really cute and wanted to apply it for my costume as well. All I really did was I drew out what I saw on the picture and then painted it orange on the bottom. I knew that nobody was going to see it, but it was a small detail that I wanted to include. I did start by painting it white first so that I didn't have to do as many layers of orange. And then I put about 2 or 3 layers of orange on top and sealed it with a varnish so that it would have a better chance of not peeling off as I walked around the convention. To attach the sole to the bottom of my boot, I just used shoe glue to do that. And that's all I did for the undersuit. Now onto the tailcoat, or the top half of the costume. For the top half of the costume, I used pattern pieces 4, 6, and 7 from the same pattern, Macau's M7-269. I did have to modify these pieces to look more like Rena's coat. To help modify and make a new pattern for these pieces, I just used this big roll of brown paper that I had gotten off of Amazon. Some of the modifications that I had to do is I had to extend the pieces by about 1 inch or 2 and round them out just like her top is more rounded at the front. For the back pieces, I had to extend it down to make a half triangle at the end to make her tail. I really just eyeballed this and then held it against my back to see if it was a proper length that I wanted. I then cut out all of the pieces. Every piece that I did cut, I ended up cutting twice because I wanted the top to be very sturdy, and in the tail I was later on going to be putting on, what is it called? Interfacing. For the tail pattern, I ended up cutting off a small portion of the tail that was going to be the white bit at the end. I then cut out all of the pieces in the fabric that I was going to need. The 2 front pieces I cut out in orange. The back piece I also cut out in orange, and then the little piece that I saved at the end for the white part of the tail, I ended up cutting that out in white, of course. I also took the tail pattern that I had created and I cut out a piece of interfacing so that it could go inside of the tail and help it keep its shape and keep it from folding over as I walk around the convention. Starting with the tails and back pieces, the first thing that I did was I sewed on the white triangle to the orange fabric so that we had the actual look of what the tail was going to be. Then I put the 2 right sides together and the interfacing on top of one of the wrong sides. I left the neck of the back piece open, that way whenever I sewed everything together I could turn it right side out and the interfacing would be on the inside of the garment. I then applied the same thing with the front pieces. I sewed them together and then I turned them inside out because I left the neck open to do so. I then decided to top stitch everything so that it would stay in place. I cut the sleeves in orange fabric and sewed them together like you normally would a pair of sleeves, and then I marked off where the triangle for the gloves was going to be. I then cut out the fabric that I had just traced and laid it out on the black fabric that I was going to use for the gloves, which was the same fabric that I used for the actual boot covers as well. I had never made gloves before, so this was another trial and error process. For this, what I did was I laid my hand out on the fold and I traced my hand over the black fabric. After my hand was traced out, I cut it and sewed it all together, being very careful around the fingers. This, just like the boot covers, required a lot of modifications. Essentially, you're just going to have to keep on putting them on and taking them off and fixing whatever you feel like needs to be fixed. Gloves have got to be one of the hardest things that I've ever made, so don't beat yourself up too much if you have a lot of trouble with it, because I sure did. I then attached the front and back pieces of the bodysuit together, sewed the gloves onto the sleeves, and attached the sleeves to the rest of the tailcoat top bodysuit piece. For the white part on the front, I did the exact same thing that I did on the under bodysuit. I put everything on, traced out where I wanted the white to be, cut it out, traced it onto the white fabric, and then pinned and sewed the white fabric onto the bodysuit again, just like before. For the black collar, I measured around my neck and I cut out black pieces that were the same length as my neck, sewed them together, and then put them onto the top coat to make the black collars at the top. And that's how I made my Rena Rouge bodysuit. I'm sorry if I wasn't great at explaining everything that I did, but my mind is a jumbled mess almost all the time. It was a big learning experience making this costume, but I had a lot of fun while I was doing it. So I do hope that this helps somebody out there if you're trying to make your own bodysuit from scratch too. If you like this video, be sure to give it a big thumbs up, and you can subscribe to me to see more of my cosplay adventures. Rena Rouge was one of the hardest costumes that I've ever made, but I learned a lot doing it, and I'm glad that I did, because it ended up looking really good and I was very happy with how the bodysuit came out. If you want to see some pictures of my Rena Rouge cosplay, you can feel free to follow me on Instagram at SweetPeaCosplay. It is where I am the most active on all of my social media platforms. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, feel free to contact me. I am happy to address anything that I may have missed in this tutorial. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!